Hello and welcome to another YouTube video featuring a topic of considerable interest, going out to CARP members across Northern Ontario and perhaps across the country as well too. We're talking about the environment and a book that's been written by a local Northern Ontario individual. I'm not going to talk about age here, but I think that Clement and myself are probably somewhat in the same category. From Evolution to Extinction, that's the title of the book. An excellent, excellent book put together, Andre, but I must admit, a little scary. If I could come up with another sort of subtitle to this book, I know you have a subtitle here which says A Primer on Global Warming, but I was thinking that global warming and the human condition might have been another subtitle as well. Do you agree that that possibly could be something that might describe what the book is all about?
That is a great part of it. The human condition is a factor that will be affecting our ability to address global warming.
No, we've just finished a COP session in Scotland about which 30,000 people apparently attended, and that was to deal with global warming, and some people referred to it as somewhat of a cop-out. Is that your understanding as well too, or do you have greater hopes?
Well, there are varied opinions about the effectiveness of COP26, but the predominance of activists and scientists are saying that it didn't do what needed to be done. And you've indicated, John, that you're feeling uncomfortable having read the book. Quite frankly, having written the book and looked at what's been happening with the international conferences on climate change, aka global warming, I am very, very uncomfortable. I'm not frightened by it because I've been dealing with this issue psychologically and personally for a number of years, and I've made my peace with it. But looking at the progress that they were not able to make in Glasgow, there have been times when I've been frightened.
Now, a lot of us have been concerned about global warming and changes in the environment, but few people have gone to the extent of actually writing a book. How did this actually come about?
Well, it's the accumulation of about 20 years of looking at the issue of global warming. In my various travels in countries or around Northern Ontario, I knew that there was something wrong. And I've been accumulating information, bits and pieces of data, reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and other groups. And last summer, the summer of 2020, I concluded that I was going to write something to try to alert people about the dangers that we're facing, the crisis that we're facing. I deliberately wrote the book to be a quick read as much as possible. I think the average reader could get through the book with about 4.5 hours of reading. Mm-hmm. I tried to make it as concise and as clear as possible to give a global overview of what the issues are. A lot of the things that are being produced are focused on the science, the measurements, and the economics and the politics about this. I've looked at almost everything. I think that is pertinent to how we can address global warming. I've looked at the limitations of governments, whether they're democratic or authoritarian. I looked at the lack of global cooperation between governments and with the international corporations or the local corporations. I looked at the overabundance of unresolved issues and crises that have plagued us. We all know about these things: wars, conflicts, revolutions, poverty, hunger, migration, displaced persons, addictions, pandemics, etc.
Well, you've certainly covered a wide range, and I know that you said maybe about 4.5 hours to to actually read the book. Well, I read it before falling asleep, and I must admit it kept me awake. So it didn't. I probably went through it maybe a little more quickly, but there are certain aspects, as you mentioned there, it's not just one thing. It involves a number of different areas. But one of the in the first chapter, you sort of looked at that tipping point, which which for some things is good. If a product comes on and it reaches a certain point, reaches a tipping point, and everybody goes out and buys it. And also businesses sometimes succeed when they reach a certain tipping point and get customers in that. But it also has a bad connotation as well too, that you can go over the edge. Now with global warming, this tipping point seems to be somewhat contentious with various segments of the well, even the scientific community. But with others, it's way off there in the future, and with others, it's just around the corner. It's 2026, and we're going to reach this tipping point. So what happens, regardless of when it is, what happens when you reach that tipping point?
When we hit that tipping point, it's going to cause a cascade of different tipping points. It's not just one thing. When the environmental systems start breaking down, you're going to, and we're already seeing this in British Columbia, California, Oregon, Washington, with the extensive heat that's going on. From that, we've got forest fires, we've got droughts. With forest fires, we've got the huge release of carbon that's stored in the trees and in the root systems in the earth. And this is continuously exacerbating the situation. And as things get warmer, you've got things like the huge fields of frozen ground that is thawing. And that releases more and more carbon. And as more carbon gets into the atmosphere mixed with methane gas and other greenhouse gases, the situations just keep on compounding each other. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, came out in a report in August before the Glasgow conference. They release a report every year. And they were saying, and I'll quote them, section B5 of the report states, many changes due to past and future greenhouse gas emissions are irreversible for centuries to millennia, especially changes in the ocean, ice sheets, and global sea level. What officially they are saying there is that the tipping point has already started. And the thing that people don't realize is that you could eliminate the emission of carbon gases tomorrow, but it could take 50 to 200 years to get the artificially produced carbons, etc., out of the system. So even though we're able to hopefully meet the 1.5 increase in carbon emissions by 2030, it's still going to take another 50 to 200 years to get rid of it completely.
Wow. So this is something that now behind me, we can see this is my backyard, actually. There's a little snow on it now. But, here in the Sudbury area, we see a sign here, drinking water protection. So we are concerned about our environment here in Sudbury to a certain extent. But we don't really know. We know out west we've had problems. We know in Europe there's been climatic events. But right here in the Sudbury area, it doesn't seem that we're that terribly affected. So should we be more alarmed?
Yes, we should be. The human condition, the human phenomenon, is that some horrible climate crisis could be happening somewhere else. For example, like British Columbia. If it's not happening here, while we may be empathetic, sympathetic to the people who are affected by the variations of climate they're facing now, if it's not hitting us personally within our eyesight and viscerally, the crisis doesn't have the same kind of impact. What we need is to have people keep on looking off in the distance to see what's happening around them. And that's one of the biggest problems that we're facing in dealing with climate change. There are millions of people who are affected by it today. They are facing the droughts, the starvation, the migrations, the displacements, and everything else. But we here in Ontario and in Sudbury, we are ideally located globally. For example, our water supply is probably better than anywhere else in the world. Because of our topography and weather patterns, we capture all kinds of water in our lake systems and everything else.
But of course, we still have to look after it as well. We can't be complacent.
Absolutely. So I know that there are people who are trying to get council to take more action on climate change, and hopefully council will, but council is a pretty small pebble in a very large pond, given the earth. but people have to become more and more aware and more empathetic about what's happening elsewhere.
Well, you talk about people. Okay, let's get to the people aspect here. We're all animals. We're the supposedly the intelligent animal, but it appears that we seem to be lacking intelligence when it comes to this particular issue. And I know you've definitely covered that a lot in the book,
Yeah.
dealing with the fact that, okay, we have the scientific situation, but then we have the human element that doesn't seem to be fully cognizant. Is there, and I know you deal with that. You deal with bureaucracy. You deal with democracies, others forms of government, and the various problems that exist. And it almost seems like it's insurmountable to overcome some of the vested interests and some of the interests that just don't seem to be interested. Uh, what's your view on that?
Well, that's my point. The crisis, the threat is very, very real. And everybody should be understanding that now, but we don't, unfortunately. And that's the scary part. The book, in a few words, could be described as doom and gloom. And it is a message of doom and gloom that most people don't want to look at.
Hmm.
I'm saying, no, now is the time to look at it and to deal with it. The human condition being what it is that it takes an awful lot to have people change their minds. The pandemic that we're facing with now is a beautiful example of how things can break down. We've got anti-vaxxers who are operating on the basis of different theories that I think most people don't agree with, but they're really holding on to those beliefs and resisting a collaborative approach to dealing with the pandemic. The same thing is going to happen with global warming. There will be demands made on people that they won't like and they'll resist. And there'll be different opinions as to how to deal with climate change. The easy question is, or the easy issue is deciding that climate change has to be addressed. We don't have that yet. We don't have that grassroots groundswell with those decisions. Those are the easy decisions. The tough decisions is, how do we deal with global warming? And that's where the cooperation, the collaboration comes in, and the sustained effort and focus on this is required. We don't have that yet. And I don't know that we will have it on time.
Well, we're looking at the situation with respect to communication, and you deal with that in the book when you talk about also social media. Now, communications, it's terrific what we've done just in the past few years, being able to, like we're doing now, communicating over the internet and being able to record, hopefully, okay, this particular conversation to further distribute it. But have we sort of almost, the technology has almost evolved more than the human capacity to appreciate it or to deal with it effectively?
Yeah, I think it has. Technology always leaps forward in huge bounds with the human species trying to keep up to what it's created.
Right.
And the communication networks that we have now are creating an awful lot of complications. And social media is working for us, but it's also working against us. There are so many, if you have any kind of opinion or position on any issue, you can go to the website and pick up 10,000 hits of information to support what your claims are. Much of them may be false, but it's very hard to tell. And underneath that, or beside in the background of all that's going on, you've got various countries that have been at cyber war ever since the Cold War evolved into electronics and evolved into the communications networks that we have.
That's true. Well, you actually have a chapter on war.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's been a human condition, you might say, or a curse, literally since the beginning of recorded history. So how does that work into this situation?
It creates a tremendous amount of distrust and misinformation. For example, I'm thinking of the Brexit movement that went on in the UK a couple of years ago when they had the referendum and the campaigns and everything else. And there were people who voted for the Brexit movement to get out of the European Union, Some of these people were interviewed after the decision was made. They were saying, yes, I voted to get out of the union, but honestly, I don't know why I did that. I think that was a bad decision. Subsequently, the British government came up about a year and a half or 2 years later saying, we were manipulated by Russia. We understand that now, that they were interfering with the campaigns that were going on. And if you look at the Trump regime, where there were accusations that the Russians were interfering with their elections, that was done electronically.
Right.
So those kind of things are going on continuously between various countries. They're all doing it. Canada's doing it. The US is doing it. North Korea is doing it. China's doing it. And this misinformation and lack of trust just pervades the whole system of communications that we're trying to deal with.
How about our own situation here in Canada? We have our government that's very much behind defeating rising temperatures and looking seriously at climate change, while at the same time endorsing pipelines and extraction of more oil, which is going to contribute to the environmental damage. And of course, we know China, Australia, and other countries who are digging up coal at an ever increasing rate. There seems to be a denial of nuclear power, which could be in the minds of many probably the cleanest form of energy. But so we have all this conflict that's going on, and meanwhile the tipping point is getting closer and closer. What is I know your last chapter has some, as my wife said, well, Andre has, when she was reading the book after me, she said, well, Andre does offer some hope if we all get together. What do you say to that?
Well, that's where the solution is. We all have to get together. Hopefully, we'll be able to elect political leaders who are going to be governing, political leaders who are intelligent and skilled and capable enough to deal with the issues. Quite frankly, I'm looking at the horizon of the political leadership that we have, not only in Canada, but basically everywhere. And I don't know that we have people who are skilled enough to be able to deal with the issues. And the reasons for my doubts about that and the causes of it are, there are many. And they're also deeply ingrained in how we govern ourselves and how our democracy operates. Those things have to be corrected also. They could all be corrected, but the critical issue is, do we have the time? Mm-hmm. That's the issue, because we've got the IPCC that's saying that the tipping point has already started. And other predictors are saying the tipping point is going to happen, it's going to start happening in the next 20 years, 2 decades, or the next 7 years. There are tipping point clocks in Berlin and New York that are ticking away the hours that are approaching towards when that tipping point is going to pass the point of irreparable damage.
No, there's still some that say, well, no, those floods out in BC back in 1948, there was severe flooding as well too, and this is just a part of a cycle, and and really it's all going to go away somewhere and sometime somehow. But yeah. How do you answer those types of concerns?
I'd say read the book. I would say read the book. The book is designed for people who either are naysayers, who are saying no, climate change doesn't exist, and those numbers are getting fewer and fewer. But what I'm hoping to do is to reach people who are saying, yeah, I understand about global warming and climate change, it's bad, etc. I got it, leave me alone. But if someone reads the book, they'll understand that we don't have a lot of time. Time is the factor.
Yeah, well, I think that people, we talk about the environment, and you've talked about it, definitely in the various chapters, the temperature rising, the tipping point, and after the tipping point. But then you go into the other aspects, government, the effects of the other factors, the other human factors that are involved, both on an individual basis, our own feelings and concerns, outlook and opinions, and also what government is doing, and also large corporations, because there's a lot of influence by large corporations themselves and through the government. We can think of, what is it, the tobacco industry that knew for years and years that nicotine was killing people, but nevertheless denied it. And we have somewhat the same situation with some of the large corporations, coal and oil, gas and that sort of thing. So, how do we believe, some of this information is trying to soothe us, not don't get too upset as to others, like including yourself, who's saying that, extinction could be around the corner.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and that is the major part of the problem for someone who is aware about the issues, who wants to do something about it. The first question they're going to ask themselves is, well, what can I do? What do I do? And the only way that you can answer that question is by getting more information. But the critical information is buried into the flurry, the blizzard of communications that are going around about all kinds of topics that are either for or against or have nothing to do with global warming. Mm-hmm. So it takes an exceptionally dedicated person to seek out the information and to persist at getting the right information to decide what to do. Personally, I'm looking at any sources of hope that we have these days, and there is some. I'm looking at the different groups of activists who are dealing with global warming. There were about 40,000 delegates at the COP26 conference in Glasgow. Most of those were activists. If you start going on the internet and looking for activist organizations dealing with climate change, there are hundreds and thousands. And the idea is to try to pick the ones that you feel are going to be the most effective and join forces and support them and start dealing with it.
What's the difference between an activist and an advocate? Is an activist merely one that's sounding the alarm and an advocate is suggesting possible solutions?
I think it's a mixture of the two. Yeah, I think it is. Advocating for the proper solutions. And there are solutions that are evolving with technology. Wind power, solar power, nuclear power, geothermal power. These kind of things are coming up. Then they're getting better. They still have their own problems. They have their own problems as businesses, development, etc. And they have their own problems of technology and communication. And hopefully they will provide the solution. But I think for the ordinary person, which is most of us, who are not directly involved with the chemistry or the mechanics or the development of these organizations or seeking out the solutions, I think the solution is to go towards activism. Mm-hmm. And to try to make people aware and to try to understand as completely as possible as to what the critical threat is with global warming.
Well, we're just about running out of time, so we don't want to, miss the opportunity to let people know where they can pick up the book, because it's widely available actually, and we understand not only in print form but also electronically too. I know I've seen it on Amazon. I think it's available through some of the other book services as well too, and you can get it and download it on your. And our CARP membership exists across the country. We have, as I mentioned before, quite a few here in Northern Ontario, but also out to BC, out on the East Coast. And, that is probably, those are areas that probably are going to experience the effects, maybe a little bit more than those of us who are inland. But there's still the matter of drought on the prairies and other situations that are all giving us pause and a reason for concern. But we want to congratulate you on the book. The fact that you've covered so many different topics, and those that I know that have read the book have been, as I did mention, we're somewhat maybe discouraged, but maybe it's better to be discouraged, and that forces you to take action. Is that one of your intents?
That's the idea. That's the idea. This is a serious matter that needs attention now. Now, if anyone is interested in getting a copy of the book, I have a few extra copies with me. They can contact me at my by email, Andre, ANDREDRC57 @gmail.com. All you have to do is ask for a copy and I'll send them one.
Okay, and I'll include that link on our YouTube video as well too. Okay. So Andre, well, you and I probably are not going to be around for the worst of if global warming does occur, as it may very well likely occur. with serious consequences, but we're probably not going to be around. But our kids, our grandkids, and future generations, this is what we're really concerned about.
Right. That's right. And I think many of us in our age group are either retired or semi-retired, and we have the time to focus on this and deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Something that the younger generations don't have because they're busy. They're busy living.
So it's really our responsibility as what might be called elders, to offer this wisdom. Maybe I know that I can recall with my grandfather years ago when I was just a kid, and there was a creek that ran through the property, and there was some sort of slick on the surface. And I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Well, that's a tanning operation up a little further, and that's part of the process is oil." And I thought at that time, that doesn't seem right. And and this is really what we have now. We
That's
have
right.
we have a lot of this contaminants that really is on our environment and something we should be looking at.
Exactly. Exactly.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Andre, for being with us. As I mentioned, I'll put information where you can get the book. If not from Andre, it's on Amazon and other sources as well. Of course, then you just Google everything nowadays, right, Andre?
Exactly.
Find From Evolution to Extinction by Andre Clement, right there.
Yeah.
Northern Ontario author from Sudbury, Ontario. I'm very proud to have you do this booklet, Andre. Thanks again.
Thank you, John. My pleasure.
Bye for now.
Take care.